Hey everyone, welcome back to the hardware news recap for the week. In this one, the worst GPU launch of all time continues. It's getting dragged out as long as possible as AMD tries to bury old blog posts where it lamented the problems of a 4GB video card. Before they released one again, and then they needed to hide the post. So we'll be talking about that. Intel is making a Bitcoin mining ASIC device. Additionally, there's news on AMD's RAMP and XMP Alternative. ASRock is the first to offer Zen 3 support for X370 motherboards, and a couple of other stories for the past week. Before that, this video is brought to you by Be Quiet and the Silent Base 802 case. The Silent Base 802 got high accolades in our review for its high build quality and its versatility in both silence-focused and airflow-focused builds. The 802 comes with swappable mesh panels or noise-damped panels, so you have options for either approach. The Silent Base 802 case is able to fit larger builds as well, without being overbearing, and it stands out for its mechanics quality and assembly quality. Learn more about Be Quiet's new case at the link in the description below. First up, just a quick GN store update for you. If you've ordered a Disappointment Build Shirt 2021, either you will have gotten a shipping notification at this point, which means it's in the mail or it's arrived to you maybe, at which point you were in round 1, or you haven't yet gotten a shipping notification, which is because our shipping team is currently working through rounds 2 and 3. We are at this point basically sold out. We've got maybe about 48 hours left of inventory for round 3, and then that's going to be it. They'll be gone. We will be bringing back just the front design in the future, as we've done for all of them in the past, but the back, this is the only time to get what we have for Disappointment Tour dates on the back of the shirt. We've got all the worst launches for 2021 listed to celebrate that video we made and have some fun for the end of the year. So if you want to get it, you've got maybe about 48 hours from when this video airs to grab one on store.gamersnexus.net, and then that's going to be it. They're closed. If you're waiting on your order, you are probably in round 2 or 3. We have to do them in 3 batches just because of the production timelines right now and shipping timelines globally. So you're going to get it soon. You'll get a notification. Of course, if you ever need to do anything like update your address or request further information, feel free to email support, but know that they'll get them all out to everybody in the next couple of weeks or so as we work through the last couple rounds here. Okay, first story, AMD confronted by its own past bullshit. AMD's RX 6500 XT was easily one of the worst, for sure. It's in the top 1 worst launches for a GPU we've ever worked on. This is partly because of the PCIe 4-lane limitation on it, coupled with the frame buffer being only 4 gigabytes. Those two things together means that anytime the card is anywhere close to hitting the frame buffer cap, it has to communicate from the PCIe bus all the way up to the CPU, to the memory, back to the CPU, back to the PCIe, down the PCIe bus, back into the GPU, and that is bad because it's going awfully far to fetch maybe a texture or whatever the game might need, a mesh, and causes issues with frame time pacing and drags down the average overall. Or it can cause, as we saw in some games with higher settings, can cause things like textures just not even loading in properly or meshes not loading in at the correct LOD. So all these things are not good, and it's because of the combination of the limited memory plus the really unnecessarily limited PCIe lanes. So Kit Guru noticed that AMD's pompous, chest-beating post it made about how 4 gigabytes of VRAM is insufficient back in 2020, Kit Guru noticed that it had suddenly disappeared, coinciding with the 6500 XT launch, which is a 4 gigabyte card. I don't even know. It's like, I would have so much more respect for AMD if it had just committed to it. If they just left it up and someone asked them, hey, what about this post? And I think I'd be okay with it if they said, yeah, no, it's still really not enough, as is evidenced by the benchmarks, but you're going to buy it anyway, because what else are you going to do? Deal with it. That I could respect. But what they did was they tried to hide it. And Kit Guru noted that the other blog posts on AMD's site were still accessible at the time, so it's not like it was a server outage. And the blog post, which was, it lamented the issues of limited VRAM, and it specifically said that 4 gigabytes of VRAM is not enough for today's games. That's the direct quote. It was in response to Nvidia's 4 gigabyte cards, 6 gigabyte cards at the time, and they were trying to basically say, look, we, AMD, don't have anything competitive really right now or for the last few years, up until the 6000 XT launches, And so we're going to just put a bunch of memory on it, and then that number will be bigger on the marketing charts, and we're just going to hit Nvidia over the head with this number until people believe it. And that's what they tried to do. Now, of course, it is no longer beneficial, so it was taken away. And then it was reinstated because Kikuru noticed it was taken away, and so they put it back. Oops. Yep, that's a coincidence. We accidentally took down that article was on a different server, and it was down for maintenance. So how the turntables, as they say. The RTX 3050 will be launching soon in direct opposition to the 6500 XT. The 3050 is an 8 gigabyte card for memory, while the AMD card obviously is less than that. This functionally guarantees that the card will not have the same level of communications issues in terms of communicating with system memory and the rest of the system that the 65 XT has. I mean, it's just, we'll see how Nvidia does overall, but certainly this aspect of it will do better. Up next, Intel is making a Bitcoin mining ASIC. This is specifically for Bitcoin. It is going to be named BZM2, and this is supposed to be an ultra low power Bitcoin miner. So the nature of being an ASIC, or an application-specific integrated circuit, is that it really only does one thing and one thing well, and it doesn't do anything else either at all or very well. Just as a reminder, GPU mining for Bitcoin is basically dead and has been for a number of years at this point. Typically when people talk about, especially mainstream media outlets that don't really just understand anything that's happening, period, typically when they talk about mining and Bitcoin mining, they think it's GPUs. It's not. It's pretty much all ASICs at this point. GPUs will handle Ethereum and a couple of other coins, Ravencoin, things like that. So Intel here is targeting Bitcoin. That means it is targeting mostly large enterprises and businesses. It has already secured a contract with a company that is valued at, I think it was $3.3 billion for their customers' valuation. So Intel's doing big business with ASIC miners. Of course, it's also still working on its ARC GPUs for desktop. That's a different thing, different category altogether. So Intel will be competing primarily with other ASIC miners in this space, like Bitmain, and Anantech wrote that the new miner will use a 7-nanometer process and run at a 2.5 watt power or heat load while producing 137 gigahashes per second. This is just for the chip, not for a complete system, so it follows, of course, that more power will be necessary for the box overall. That ultimately comes with the BZM2 chip. At its current numbers, Intel's miner would be among the most efficient solutions on the market, according to Anantech's table that will show. Intel's reasoning for entering the market is simple and should be predictable because it's a large, faceless, amorphous, publicly traded entity, and so the answer to why is money, which is fine. In this instance, Intel says that crypto mining will grow for at least the next 4 years. It is estimating significant growth in the billions of dollars for crypto mining hardware specifically, so not factoring in crypto prices to the extent that they're predictable anyway. This is just talking about hardware. We previously reported on Intel rejecting the prospect of hard blocking its ARC GPUs from being capable of mining. So Intel said in, I think it was a press event, that they would not be introducing any limitations like Nvidia did with LHR. It did not indicate that it wishes its ARC GPUs to be used for mining. It would benefit Intel actually if they were used only for gaming, because Intel needs to grow market share there to convince developers that its GPUs and GPU features should be supported. So that it would actually be bad for Intel on the gaming market if only miners buy it. But anyway, that's a different story, and we'll come back to that one once the ARC GPUs launch. All right, AMD RAMP is next. So in a list of upcoming changes posted in the Hardware Info 64 software update page on its website, there was an update line for support for AMD's technically yet to be announced RAMP. At this point, the text mentioning RAMP has been replaced with enhanced support of future AMD AM5 platforms, though it seems that the developer behind Hardware Info took to the computer-based forums to confirm both the existence and the function of AMD's RAMP, which is essentially a modern successor to the company's previous memory acceleration and profile technology, AMP. If you've worked with Ryzen boards in the past, you've very likely seen something like DOCP or EOCP from Asus and Gigabyte respectively there. These are just those brands' specific ways of avoiding XMP licensing fees, but still pulling in all the same data. XMP is an extreme memory profile. It's technically an Intel thing. It's an Intel trademark. It is licensed by Intel. And what XMP does is pull in timings that are stored on the stick. It can't store all of them, but it can get a good amount, like all the primary, some of the secondary, pulls those in, and then obviously you get your higher frequency and your better timings rather than the JEDEC timings, which are the sort of natively supported default ones. AMD has long toiled to bring XMP counterparts to the market, both in the form of AMP and AXMP previously. However, neither one of those really took off, and they certainly did little to crack Intel's ironclad grip on memory overclocking or onboard memory profiles. And the royalty costs are a problem here too. With AMD's RAMP, AMD is looking to take another shot at memory profiles and acceleration, as well as introduce a more official counterpart to Intel's XMP. It's set to be supported on AMD's upcoming socket AM5 and will work with DDR5, starting with Ryzen 7000 series CPUs or Zen 4. And just a reminder or clarification here, XMP, the profiles, will still work on AMD platforms. The naming's a little bit different though. All right, next one. ASRock is first up to offer X370 support for Zen 3. We've seen a lot of you in the comments talking about this over the past, well, a couple months really, but most recently in the story where we talked about AMD speculating it may be able to support Zen 3 on X370. Not long ago, AMD publicly stated that the company was actively looking to try and bring support to more things than A320. Technically, they did get Zen 3 support on the oldest platform, just not the one anyone cared about. So X370 was the next obvious choice. At the time, AMD cited some unique challenges it was facing with adding support for newer CPUs on older chipsets, such as the well-documented 16 megabyte SPI ROM chip struggles, as well as more power-hungry CPUs being dropped into motherboards that might not be up to the task of powering them. At any rate, it seems that either ASRock has jumped the gun or AMD has made a whole lot of progress in a short time, or maybe some of both. Over at ASRock's website, the company is now listing several Ryzen 5000 CPUs as being supported on ASRock's X370 Pro 4 motherboard. Such SKUs include the R9 5950X, the R9 5900X, and there's also support for several of AMD's Renoir-based CPUs as well. ASRock notes that many of these models will require a BIOS update, and you'll have to use another CPU for that. Of course, where BIOS flashback is present, you could use that instead. This could have some interesting implications, and we'll wait and see what other motherboard makers join in and follow ASRock's lead. Up next, remember when Nvidia launched the 3080 Ti and it seemed like an egregious on-the-nose cash grab that was entirely predicated on the current situation in the market and done in such an aggressive and forward way that you could only appreciate the confidence and hubris of Nvidia? Well, they've done it again with the 3080 12 gigabyte. This is one we knew was going to happen. It was in the rumor mill for a while. The 3080 was a 10 gigabyte card, just as a reminder. Now there's a 12 gigabyte version. That's basically all there is to the story. This is an utter ripoff. It's a shame. It's disappointing, and it's really not worth talking about further, but it exists, so now you're informed. The really shady and gross thing with this is how Nvidia tried to do this covertly. We were aware of this a bit before of their launch, like the impending launch, because we had some people offer us 12 gigabyte models that accidentally got out to them as engineering samples ahead of the official launch, but we couldn't do anything with them because the drivers were intentionally limited by Nvidia to make sure press or users couldn't actually produce any data on the cards. Nvidia is at a point where it has realized if it samples people, at least for these cards, that it's going to be burned for doing so, and apparently the solution was to not sample them, which is fine with us, but also not tell anyone about them. Okay, also fine with us. We could go ask AIB partners for the card to review that we know is going to suck, and they would be happy to send it to us because they're not happy with Nvidia either. So here's where we stand on this one, just to make sure everyone's clear. We're not going to review the 12 gigabyte card, at least for now. Not unless there's some major reason for me to, because we already know what our conclusion is, which is the same as our 3080 Ti conclusion. So if you're wondering, what does GN think of the 3080 12 gigabyte? Is it good? I can tell you by looking at the specs on a sheet of paper, we would not recommend buying it. We think it's a ripoff, it's a gouge, and it's a very unfortunate situation where it's just more of the same with the 3080 Ti. This could have just been more 3080 10 gigabyte cards, or maybe even more 3080 Ti's if they must, which would reduce segmentation and, in theory, help a little bit with cost control. But Nope. So anyway, we're not going to review this. I don't know. It's possible, I guess, but I see no value in it, and my opinion is not going to change. So we know the numbers. It's irrelevant. Let's move on. Puget Systems and the most reliable hardware of 2021. Other than the most reliable trend being getting ripped off, Puget has looked at the hardware reliability by looking at its customer uses and its own internal testing and DOA rate for things that arrive. Puget has a lot of charts in this write-up. It defines shop failures as anything that would be typically considered DOA or a failure that was caught during Puget Systems burn-in and stress testing prior to shipping systems. It considers field failures to be those which the device failed in a customer's hands and was likely sent back. With CPUs, Puget noted that Intel Xeon W3300 and Core 12th Gen line CPUs are new enough that it doesn't have enough sales data to fairly compare them to other CPUs. Beyond that, it observed that Intel Xeon W2200 series and Scalable family were among the most reliable CPUs in its workstations, while Intel's 11th Gen Core series saw the most recorded failures, both internally and in the field with customers. The failure rate was 5.3% internally, which is actually massive when you're talking about DOAs and not just death from bad vCore settings or something. For memory, Puget splits its chart into three categories: DDR4 3200, DDR4 3200 ECC, and then another with ECC registered. Puget stated that all of the memory it uses for its systems is DDR4, and it is all clocked at 3200 megahertz, though the company expects that to change in 2022 with the arrival of DDR5. At any rate, regular good DDR4 saw the most combined failure rates, while DDR4 ECC registered proved to be the most reliable, perhaps to no one's surprise. For GPUs, Puget uses Nvidia's cards and has broken the charts out as follows: Nvidia RTX 30 series, Founders Edition, the Asus EVGA Gigabyte MSI and PNY cards for 30 series, the Quadro series, and then the Professional RTX A series. The Nvidia RTX Professional A series is its successor to the Quadro line, as Nvidia dropped the Quadro branding last year for upper-end RTX workstation cards. Interestingly, Puget's data shows Nvidia FE cards faring better than those from Nvidia AIB partners, and the RTX Quadro series has the most shop failures of any card. Puget noted that this is due to a manufacturing problem with the USB-C virtual link port on the RTX Quadro 4000 series cards that affected a large portion of its inventory. For storage, Puget shows that WD Red hard drives and WD Ultrastar hard drives have the most combined failure rates, and it noted that the failure rates for both groups were similar, despite being targeted at very different customers. Up next, just a quick console one. Sony is going to maintain production of the PS4. That's right, not misspeaking. The PlayStation 4 will continue being produced throughout 2022. This is following Microsoft discontinuing its older Xboxes. And this is also despite unconfirmed reports that Sony could ease production of the PS4 in 2021. So Bloomberg, citing sources allegedly familiar with the matter, states that Sony told its assembly and manufacturing partners late last year that it would continue production for the PS4, and it says the reason it's doing so is to try and help with try to mitigate the limitation of inventory on PS5s. By keeping the PS4 alive, Sony will add, quote, about 1 million PS4 consoles to the supply this year and offer prospective customers a cheaper alternative while offsetting the constrained supply of the PS5s. Up next, AMD's AM5 ILM CPUs and IHSs in the news. It's a lot of letters. This is as AMD transitions to an LGA package for LGA Ryzen 7000 series CPUs and socket AM5. This is also trying to avoid some of Intel's missteps with LGA 1700 and the Alder Lake CPUs. So we're going to be talking about AMD's retention mechanism for socket AM5, basically. Now, with Intel, you might know to the extent that it existed in the past, at least HEDT series, or X99, X79, X299, where you've got a wider socket that has a backplate, metal backplate, and then 4 standoffs that come through the board. Really durable, great to work with, easy to do a lot of replacement cycles of coolers, things like that, but a little bit more expensive than the rest of the LGA CPU sockets from Intel, which you almost always use a backplate from the cooler manufacturer instead of some included one. As for why this is relevant, it looks like AMD might be doing something more similar to the X79 or X99 boards rather than the Intel desktop series boards. In renders and CAD diagrams obtained by Igor from Igor's lab, AMD's retention mechanism for its LGA Ryzen CPUs will feature a separate retention plate that sits between the motherboard and will be replete with 4 insulated and threaded standoffs that will allow AMD's socket actuation mechanism, or SAM, not to be confused with AMD's other SAM, Smart Access Memory, to be installed. There's another 4 threaded standoffs for heatsink and cooler mounting. All of this allows for a lot more rigidity, as well as adding 4 more points to spread out all the mechanical stress of both the cam lever and the CPU cooler, which will help avoid bending the IHS or the CPU package itself. Now, this will increase the socket price, and it will therefore increase the motherboard price. Maybe not a lot. Depends on what kind of multiplier the motherboard manufacturers put on the added line item when they're paying everything out and calculating their margin, but it'll affect things nonetheless. In terms of quality, if AMD executes it well, this is basically the best type of socket we've worked with, so that's good to see. Getting a bunch of backplates from all these different cooler manufacturers just is cumbersome and wasteful, and a lot of times they're executed very poorly because they try to do it cheap. So if it's standardized via the CPU manufacturer, it could be a good thing. AMD's goal is to spread out the clamping force across several points via a rigid backplate installed behind the motherboard, but that may pose a problem for coolers that you're bringing forward that require their own backplates. So it's going to be a standard scenario where AMD's already said that AM4 coolers will be supported on AM5, which is awesome, but you're going to probably need an adapter kit because cooler manufacturers will need to release something that'll fit in the standoffs instead of relying on their previous backplate. Most likely anyway, so not a big surprise, but it does mean that more obscure coolers that you've purchased may not get that update, whereas something more incumbent in the market like Noctua, for example, will probably get updates. Speaking of, Noctua has updated its product roadmap for 2022, and the upcoming products include a new 120mm dual CPU tower. It's got white fans in the plans as well, and the liberal use of the words next generation to describe many of its upcoming products. That said, it seems Noctua has several updates to existing product lines planned for this year as well, especially as it pertains to fans and CPU coolers. Curiously, because it's Noctua, one of the most interesting pieces of news from them is adding a new colorway. So Noctua previously added its Chromax fans where it had black fans and then it had these multicolor rubber options that you could attach to the border of the fan. Now it's adding a white fan, and that's really kind of the start and the end of that news. It's a change from the de facto Noctua brown and beige color scheme. It's actually something that we saw at Computex 2019 as prototypes. At the time Noctua was targeting a 2020 release, that didn't happen. Noctua is now targeting a Q4 2022 release date for these fans. Additionally, Noctua is planning a next-generation NHD15. Noctua's NHD15 is one of its flagship coolers and has been around since about 2014. What exactly Noctua is planning, though, remains to be seen. It's targeting Q4 2022 for the new NHD15, and we will test that on our CPU cooler bench. Elsewhere, Noctua is looking to expand its catalog to include 24-volt to 12-volt converters. It's looking to add an 8-way fan hub, and it's expanding its line of 24-volt fans to include 80mm options. Noctua also has new Intel Xeon coolers in the oven, and it's still working on that desk fan. So that's it for this one. As always, thank you for watching. Subscribe for more. You can go to store.gamersnexus.net to grab the last one of these shirts, and we'll see you all next time.